HR said I was replaceable, so I led the audit. That destroyed them. They said I was replaceable. They were wrong. 6 months later, I returned not with a resume, but with federal authority, an audit team, and a long list of crimes they thought they'd buried beneath their balance sheets. They didn't know the person they'd just discarded was the only one with enough evidence to destroy their entire careers. And I did it. One question, one number, one report at a time. My name is Charlotte Rains, and this is how I brought down an empire with nothing but patience, precision, and the very regulations they thought they could ignore. The morning they fired me started like any other Tuesday at Teldrex Global. I'd been director of compliance for 7 years, arriving early to review the latest cross-border transaction reports before the C-suite descended from their glass tower offices. The coffee was still hot in my mug when my phone buzzed with a message from HR. Please report to conference room B at 9:00 a.m. No subject line, no context, just those clinical words that every corporate veteran knows spell trouble. I finished my coffee slowly, savoring what I suspected would be my last cup from the executive kitchen's premium machine. At 8:55, I gathered a manila folder from my desk drawer, one I'd kept locked for 3 years, marked simply, pending legal review. Then I walked to my execution. Miranda Chen, VP of Human Resources, sat at the conference table with 2 junior HR associates flanking her like bureaucratic bodyguards. A termination packet lay centered on the polished wood surface, its corporate letterhead pristine and damning. "Charlotte, please sit," Miranda said, her voice carrying that manufactured empathy they teach in HR certification courses. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some organizational changes." I sat, placing my folder beside the termination packet. The contrast wasn't lost on me, their crisp new documents, versus my worn manila folder stuffed with photocopies and flash drives. "Due to a strategic restructuring of our compliance division," Miranda continued, reading from a script she'd probably memorized, "we're eliminating several positions, including yours. This is purely a business decision and in no way reflects on your performance." The junior associates nodded in synchronized agreement, their faces carefully neutral. I recognized the technique overwhelm with presence, minimize resistance. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "And my replacement." Miranda's eye twitched the first crack in her facade. "As I said, this is an elimination, not a replacement." "Of course," I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Though I imagine Liam Whitaker will need significant training when he starts next Monday. 24 is quite young for a director of compliance role, especially without any certifications." The silence that followed was exquisite. Miranda's mouth opened slightly, then closed. The junior associates exchanged glances. They hadn't expected me to know about the CEO's nephew, fresh from his MBA program, already lined up for my position. "I'm not sure where you heard." "The same place I heard about the Q3 vendor payment discrepancies," I interrupted, tapping my manila folder. "The same place I learned about the creative reclassification of consulting fees. The same place I discovered which board members signed off on expense reports they never actually reviewed." Miranda's manufactured empathy evaporated. "Are you threatening us, Charlotte?" "Threatening?" I laughed, genuinely amused. "No, Miranda. Threats are for people who need leverage. I'm simply observing that compliance is a complex field. Easy to make mistakes when you don't understand the federal reporting requirements." I stood, leaving their termination packet untouched. "I'll clean out my office within the hour. I assume my final paycheck will include the full severance package outlined in my contract." "Yes, of course." Miranda's relief was palpable. They thought I was going quietly. "Excellent." I picked up my manila folder, cradling it like a newborn. "Oh, and Miranda, that phrase you used earlier about this being purely business, remember it. I certainly will." The walk back to my office felt surreal. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, of catching errors that could have triggered federal investigations, of protecting executives who now considered me disposable. I packed methodically personal items only, leaving behind the corporate detritus that had once seemed so important. But I kept the folder. And more importantly, I kept the backup drives hidden in my car, the encrypted files on my personal cloud storage, the printed emails I'd forwarded to my personal account over the years. Not out of malice originally. I'd kept them as insurance, a defensive measure in an industry where blame flows downhill and compliance officers make convenient scapegoats. Now they would serve a different purpose. The security guard who escorted me out was apologetic. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Rains. You were always good to us." "Thank you. Marcus," I handed him my access badge. "Take care of yourself, and maybe update that resume. Big changes coming." He frowned but said nothing. Smart man. In my car. I sat for a moment in the parking garage, staring at the concrete pillars I'd passed every morning for 7 years. My phone buzzed with messages, former colleagues expressing shock. A few competitors fishing to see if I'd jump ship immediately. I ignored them all except one. Grace Hoffman. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry. This is wrong. Coffee later." Grace was one of the few genuine people at Teldrex, a senior analyst who'd helped me untangle more than one suspicious transaction. I texted back, "Rain check, but save your personal files. Trust me." Then I drove home, my manila folder riding shotgun like a passenger holding secrets that could burn down everything behind us. The phrase echoed in my mind as I navigated downtown traffic, "You're replaceable." Such a casually cruel thing to say, as if years of institutional knowledge could be swapped out like a printer cartridge, as if the relationships I'd built with federal regulators meant nothing, as if the subtle art of keeping a multinational corporation on the right side of increasingly complex regulations was something any MBA graduate could master with a weekend seminar. They would learn otherwise. Not through anger or revenge, those were emotions for people who acted impulsively. No, they would learn through the slow, methodical application of the very systems they'd taught me to navigate. I had been replaceable. But my knowledge of their secrets, that was irreplaceable, and they'd just given me every reason to use it. 2 weeks after my termination, I was sitting in a downtown restaurant that charged $30 for a salad, wondering why I'd agreed to this meeting. The unemployment checks hadn't started yet, and my severance would only last 6 months if I was careful. The last thing I needed was an overpriced lunch with a former colleague who probably wanted to pump me for information about Teldrex's compliance processes. Then Garrett Moss walked in, and I remembered exactly why I'd agreed. Garrett and I had worked together briefly 5 years ago when he was still in private practice, conducting an external audit of Teldrex's international transactions. He'd been thorough, methodical, and utterly incorruptible, qualities that had made him deeply unpopular with Teldrex's executive team. They'd been relieved when the audit ended, and Garrett returned to Washington. Now he wore the understated suit of a federal employee, his hair more gray than I remembered, his handshake firm and familiar. "Charlotte, you look well for someone who just escaped corporate prison." "Funny," I accepted the menu from our waiter. "I was thinking the same about you. The government must agree with you." "It has its moments." He ordered water. I did the same, partly from solidarity, partly from economy. "I heard about Teldrex, organizational restructuring." "That's the official story." "And the unofficial one?" I studied his face. Garrett had always been good at asking questions he already knew the answers to. The CEO's nephew needed a job. Apparently, compliance seemed like an easy entry point. "Liam Whitaker." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his eyes. 24 years old, MBA from a third-tier program, no relevant experience. "You've been checking." "It's what I do now." He pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "Office of Regulatory Oversight, Financial Crimes Division." I picked up the card, feeling its weight. Moving up in the world. Moving to where I can make a difference. He paused while the waiter took our orders. When we were alone again, he leaned forward slightly. "Charlotte, I'm going to be direct. We're building a new strategic audit team. Corporate compliance specialists who understand how companies hide their sins in plain sight. And you want me to name names, give you the inside dirt on Teldrex." I kept my voice neutral, but my pulse quickened. No. His response surprised me. I want you to join the team. The restaurant noise seemed to fade. I set down my water glass carefully. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to do what you've always done, but with actual authority. No more writing reports that get buried. No more watching executives ignore your warnings. When you flag something suspicious, it triggers an investigation, not a cover-up. The pay is government scale, I said, though we both knew that wasn't my primary concern. The pay is stable, the benefits are excellent, and the jurisdiction, he smiled slightly. The jurisdiction is any corporation operating under U.S. financial regulations, including, coincidentally, companies like Teldrex Global. Our salads arrived. I picked at mine, thinking, this seems like remarkably convenient timing. You think I'm recruiting you to go after your former employer, aren't you? Garrett took a deliberate bite, chewing slowly before answering. I'm recruiting you because you're one of the best compliance officers I've ever worked with. What you do with that position is entirely up to you. We investigate based on evidence, not personal vendettas. But if evidence happened to exist, then we would be obligated to investigate thoroughly. He met my eyes. Hypothetically speaking, of course. I thought about the manila folder in my apartment, the backup drives, the encrypted files, all perfectly legal to possess. I'd been careful to only save documents I'd had legitimate access to as Director of Compliance. But their meaning, their implications, their potential to unravel carefully constructed facades. When would I start? 6 weeks, standard federal background check and onboarding. The question is whether you're interested. I pushed my half-eaten salad aside. Garrett, can I ask you something off the record? He nodded. When you were auditing Teldrex 5 years ago, what did you really think of their books? He was quiet for a long moment. I thought they were one executive decision away from massive federal violations. I documented 17 areas of concern. My report recommended immediate remediation. I implemented every one of your recommendations, I said. Fought for them, lost political capital pushing them through. I know. It's one of the reasons I'm sitting here. He signaled for the check. Charlotte, whatever you're thinking about doing with information from your time at Teldrex, be careful. There's a difference between justice and revenge. What if I'm not sure which one I'm after? Then you're being honest. Most people lie to themselves about their motivations. He paid the check despite my protests. Take a week to think about it. But Charlotte, whatever you decide, make sure you can live with it. This kind of work, it changes you. As we parted outside the restaurant, I wondered if he knew I'd already made my decision. The moment Miranda had called me replaceable. The moment they'd chosen nepotism over competence. The moment they'd assumed I would simply disappear, they'd written their own warrant. I spent the next 6 weeks in preparation. Not the bitter plotting of someone seeking petty revenge, but the methodical groundwork of a professional who understood that the most devastating blows come from within the system itself. I organized my files, creating a clear chain of documentation for every suspicious transaction I'd flagged over the years. I reached out to former colleagues not to gather dirt, but to understand who was still there, who had left, and why. The pattern that emerged was telling anyone who asked too many questions found themselves restructured out of existence. Grace met me for coffee 3 weeks into my preparation. She looked exhausted, stress etched in lines that hadn't existed 6 months ago. It's chaos, she said without preamble. Liam doesn't understand basic reporting requirements. He asked why we need to document wire transfers over $10,000, actually asked, in a meeting, why the government needs to know about private business transactions. And the executives are telling him he's doing a great job. Miranda sends out weekly emails about how refreshing it is to have innovative thinking and compliance. Grace laughed bitterly. Innovation, that's what they're calling it when he suggests we can save time by bulk approving vendor payments without review. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. Are you documenting these suggestions? Everything, email threads, meeting minutes, even recorded a few conversations on my phone. She paused. That's legal, right? See, is a one-party consent jurisdiction. It is, I smiled slightly. Smart thinking. Though be careful. They're already looking for excuses to clear out anyone who worked closely with me. I know. I've been updating my resume. She hesitated. Charlotte, there's something else. Remember those consulting fees you flagged last year? The ones that got reclassified. My attention sharpened. The Meridian Group payments. They're running the same play again. Only this time, it's not $50,000 here and there. Liam approved a series of payments totaling $3 million, all to different companies. But when I traced the registration, they all lead back to the same address. A strip mall in Delaware. Classic shell company setup. She slid a flash drive across the table. I made copies before Liam decided we didn't need to maintain redundant documentation anymore. I pocketed the drive. Grace, you need to be very careful. This is exactly the kind of thing that could trigger a federal investigation, I know. Her smile was sharp. Maybe it's time someone reminded them why compliance exists. The background check for my federal position was thorough, but routine. They interviewed my references, verified my employment history, ran my fingerprints through every database imaginable. When they asked about my termination from Teldrex, I told the truth eliminated in a restructuring to make room for the CEO's nephew. The investigator's expression suggested this wasn't the first time he'd heard such a story. Training at the Office of Regulatory Oversight was like returning to graduate school. If graduate school involved learning how to dismantle corporate fraud with surgical precision, we studied forensic accounting, federal statute interpretation, interview techniques, and the delicate art of building cases that would hold up in court. My classmates were an interesting mix, former FBI agents, recovering corporate lawyers, accounting professors who'd gotten tired of teaching theory. We bonded over bad coffee and worse hours, united by a shared belief that white-collar crime had gone unpunished for too long. The key, our lead instructor explained during a particularly intense session on audit methodology, is patience. These corporations have teams of lawyers ready to challenge every comma in your reports. You need to be bulletproof. One procedural error, one overreach of authority, and entire cases collapse. I thought about my manila folder, now transformed into a comprehensive digital archive. Every document properly obtained during my legitimate access period. Every email saved, according to Teldrex's own data retention policies. Every suspicious pattern identified through standard compliance reviews I'd been authorized to conduct. They'd trained me well at Teldrex, perhaps too well. 6 weeks flew by. I graduated third in my training class, earning particular recognition for my analysis of complex international transaction patterns. My supervisor, a former prosecutor named David Kim, pulled me aside after the graduation ceremony. "Rains, you've got good instincts. Where did you develop them?" 7 years trying to keep a multinational corporation honest, I replied. It was educational. I bet. He handed me my first assignment folder. You're being assigned to the Mid-Atlantic region, based in DRC, but covering Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. Interesting territory for someone with your background. Delaware, where shell companies went to hide, where Grace had traced those suspicious payments. I'm familiar with the area, I said carefully. Good. Take a week to get settled in your new office. Then we'll discuss your preliminary audit targets. He paused. Oh, and Rains, I know Garrett Moss recruited you personally. He's a good judge of character, but he also believes in second chances and fresh starts. Don't disappoint him. I won't, I promised, meaning it. What I planned wasn't about disappointment or personal vendettas. It was about the systematic application of justice to those who believed themselves immune. My new office was small but functional, with a window overlooking a parking garage. I spent my first day arranging reference materials and logging into federal databases I'd only dreamed of accessing before. The amount of information at my fingertips was intoxicating: corporate filings, historical audit reports, cross-referenced financial data going back decades. On my second day, I began my preliminary research, not on Teldrex, that would be too obvious, too eager. Instead, I studied patterns across the entire financial sector, looking for common indicators of the kind of creative accounting I'd spent years trying to prevent. By the end of the week, I had identified 17 companies warranting closer examination. I ranked them by risk factors, geographic location, and potential impact. Teldrex Global ranked 15th on my list. Just low enough to avoid suspicion, just high enough to justify eventual scrutiny. I submitted my preliminary report to David Kim, complete with methodology notes and risk assessments. He reviewed it over coffee, occasionally nodding or making notes in the margins. "Thorough work," he said finally. "You've identified some companies we've had our eye on for a while. Others are new to our radar. This Teldrex Global, what drew your attention?" I pulled up my supporting documentation. Recent leadership changes in key positions. Their new director of compliance has no relevant certifications or experience. They've also shown unusual patterns in their vendor payment schedules, multiple payments just under reporting thresholds, all within the same fiscal quarters. "Structuring," David murmured. "Classic red flag?" "That's what I thought, but it's not enough for a full audit, yet." "Agreed. Keep them on your watch list. Focus on these top 5 for now." He tapped the companies I'd ranked highest, but Rain's good catch on the leadership change angle. It's often when new, inexperienced people take over that systems start to break down. I kept my expression neutral. Or when they think they can innovate their way around federal regulations. David laughed. "Exactly. Welcome to the ORO, Rains. I think you're going to fit in just fine." That night, I celebrated my successful first week with a glass of wine and a review of Grace's flash drive. The payments she'd documented were even more suspicious than she'd indicated. Not just shell companies, but a complex web of transfers designed to obscure the ultimate recipients. I cross-referenced the payment dates with my personal calendar from that period. Every major transfer coincided with board meetings where I'd been mysteriously excluded from the agenda. Meetings where, according to the official minutes, compliance matters were discussed and approved in my absence. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The wine turned bitter in my mouth, not from anger I'd moved past that, but from the realization of how thoroughly they'd played me. I'd been so focused on protecting the company from external threats that I'd missed the rot spreading from within. Well, everyone learns eventually. I closed the files and went to bed, dreaming of spreadsheets and audit trails. In my dreams, numbers marched in perfect formation, revealing their secrets to those who knew how to look. 3 months into my tenure at ORO, I received an unexpected email from Teldrex Global Events. "You're cordially invited to the Teldrex Global Annual Stakeholder Gala, celebrating another year of innovation and growth." The invitation was addressed to my personal email, not my government address. Someone in their events department hadn't updated their database. I stared at the golden digital invitation, its corporate elegance masking what I knew lay beneath. My first instinct was to delete it. My second was to laugh at the absurdity. My third, the one that won, was to RSVP, yes. I still had the appropriate dress, after all. The next morning, I knocked on David Kim's door. "I've been invited to a corporate event at one of the companies on my watch list, Teldrex Global. Is it appropriate for me to attend?" He leaned back in his chair. "In what capacity were you invited?" "Former employee. Their events team hasn't updated their distribution list." "Are you currently investigating them?" "They're on my preliminary watch list, but I haven't opened an active file." "Then technically, there's no conflict. It could even be valuable observation of corporate culture, leadership dynamics. Just remember you're there as a private citizen, not a federal agent. No investigating, no accessing restricted areas, no representing yourself as ORO." "Of course." "And Rains," he gave me a knowing look. "Try not to make it obvious that you're cataloging every compliance violation you see." The Ritz-Carlton ballroom hadn't changed since my last Teldrex gala. The same crystal chandeliers, the same strategic lighting designed to make everyone look successful, the same clusters of executives pretending their conversations weren't negotiations. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a black cocktail dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and forgettable. Nice enough to blend in, Simple enough to avoid drawing attention. My invitation got me past security with only a cursory glance. Charlotte. I turned to find Marcus, the security guard who'd escorted me out 6 months ago. Now working event security. His surprise was evident. Hello, Marcus, freelancing. Yeah, picked up some side work after things changed. He lowered his voice. Lot of us moved on after you left. Felt like the writing was on the wall. You know. Smart move. I touched his arm briefly. Take care of yourself. I moved into the crowd before he could ask why I was there. The familiar faces were a mix of comfort and calculation, some genuinely pleased to see me, others clearly uncomfortable with my presence. I navigated the social minefield with practiced ease, making small talk while cataloging the power dynamics on display. Charlotte Rains. The voice behind me was honeyed poison. What a surprise. I turned to face Miranda Chen, resplendent in a red designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Miranda, lovely event. Yes, we've had quite a successful year. So many positive changes since the restructuring. She sipped her champagne, eyes never leaving mine. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd moved on to other opportunities. I have. Federal service suits me well. The champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. Federal service. Office of Regulatory Oversight, Financial Crimes Division. I let that sink in for a moment. But I'm here tonight as a private citizen. Of course, old habits. I always enjoyed these galas. Of course. Her smile became fixed. How interesting. I hope you're finding it rewarding. Very. It's amazing what you can accomplish when people actually listen to compliance recommendations. A flash of anger crossed her features before she regained control. Well, I should mingle. Enjoy your evening. Charlotte. She retreated with the kind of haste that suggested urgent conversations would be happening in quiet corners very soon. I counted that as a victory. Miss Rains. I turned to find a young man in an ill-fitting tuxedo, looking nervous and out of place. It took me a moment to recognize him from the corporate photos. Liam Whitaker, my replacement. Mr. Whitaker, how are you finding the compliance role? Oh, good. Great. Actually, he shifted his weight nervously. I've heard a lot about you. Everyone says you really knew your stuff. That's kind of them. Yeah, I mean, the files you left behind are super detailed. Maybe too detailed. He laughed awkwardly. I've been trying to streamline things. All those reports and documentation requirements seem kind of excessive, you know. I kept my expression neutral. Federal regulations can seem burdensome when you're not familiar with their purpose. Exactly. That's what I told Uncle, Mr. Whitaker, the CEO. We're running a business, not a library. Why keep all these records when nobody ever looks at them? Nobody looks at them until they need them, I said gently. Usually during an audit or investigation. But what are the chances of that, really? He grinned with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. We're a legitimate company. It's not like we're criminals or something. Behind him, I caught sight of several board members in intense discussion. One of them kept glancing in my direction. The news of my federal position was spreading through the gala like wildfire. You're right, I told Liam. I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. Enjoy the party. I left him looking confused and made my way to the bar. The bartender, another familiar face, poured me a club soda without being asked. Good to see you back, Ms. Rains, he said quietly, even if it's just for tonight. Thank you, James. How have things been? He glanced around before answering. Different. Lot of new faces in accounting and legal. Lot of closed-door meetings. Lot of people looking nervous when federal regulations come up. Change can be unsettling, I said diplomatically. That's one word for it. He moved to serve another guest, but not before adding, whatever you're doing now, I hope it involves keeping honest companies honest. Something like that. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of calculated conversations. I was seated at a table with mid-level managers, far from the executive inner circle, but with an excellent view of the room. Throughout dinner, I watched the ripple effects of my presence: hushed conversations, worried glances, at least 3 people making urgent phone calls. The most interesting moment came during the CEO's speech. Richard Whittaker, Liam's uncle, stood at the podium projecting confidence and success. He spoke about innovation, growth, and breaking free from outdated compliance constraints that hinder progress. This year, he announced, Teldrex Global has streamlined operations, reduced bureaucratic overhead, and positioned itself for unprecedented growth. We've proven that with fresh perspectives and bold leadership, we can transform challenges into opportunities. The applause was enthusiastic. I clapped politely, noting which board members seemed less convinced by the rhetoric. As the evening wound down, I made my strategic exit. Near the coat check, I encountered Grace, who looked elegant but exhausted. "Charlotte, I heard you were here." She glanced around nervously. "I also heard about your new position." News travels fast. Everything travels fast here. Rumors, concerns, documentation. She pressed something into my hand, a business card. "My personal email, in case you ever want to catch up properly." "I'd like that." "Good, because I have a feeling we'll have a lot to discuss, soon." Outside, waiting for my Uber, I reflected on the evening. I'd accomplished what I'd come for: not investigation, but notification. My presence alone had sent a clear message: Teldrex Global was not operating in a vacuum. Their actions had observers, and those observers now had federal authority. In my apartment, I carefully documented my observations, not for official use, but for my own reference. Corporate culture insights, leadership dynamics, potential areas of concern, all within the bounds of what any informed observer might notice. Then I opened my secure files and began preparing something else entirely: a comprehensive analysis of publicly available information about Teldrex Global, SEC filings, news articles, published financial statements, the kind of research any diligent federal auditor would conduct on a company showing risk indicators. By dawn, I had assembled enough public domain information to justify a preliminary inquiry. Not a full audit, not yet, but enough to start asking official questions. Monday morning, I presented my findings to David Kim. He reviewed them with the thoroughness I'd come to expect, asking pointed questions about my methodology and sources. "All publicly available information," he confirmed. "Nothing that required your prior insider knowledge." "Correct, though my familiarity with the company helped me know where to look in the public records. That's what makes experienced auditors valuable." He closed the file. "I'm approving a preliminary inquiry. Low-key for now: document requests, some informal interviews, see what shakes loose." "Understood. I'll keep it strictly professional." "I know you will." He paused. "Rains, I need to ask, are you going to be able to maintain objectivity on this, given your history?" I considered the question seriously. My history makes me more determined to be thorough and fair. If they're operating cleanly, my audit will show that. If they're not, I shrugged, then they'll face the same consequences as any other company violating federal regulations. "Fair enough. Keep me updated." Back in my office, I began drafting the initial document requests: standard items, vendor payment records, board meeting minutes, internal audit reports, the kind of routine requests that compliant companies could fulfill easily, the kind that would cause panic in companies with something to hide. I thought about Liam Whittaker's casual dismissal of documentation requirements, about Miranda's sharp smile and hasty retreat, about Richard Whittaker's speech celebrating the elimination of compliance constraints. They'd said I was replaceable. They'd been right, in a way. Charlotte Rains, Director of Compliance, was gone. In her place stood Charlotte Rains, Federal Auditor, and she had questions that demanded answers. The initial document request landed on Teldrex Global's legal department like a precision-guided missile on a Tuesday morning. I knew because Grace texted me exactly 3 minutes after it was delivered. "The building just went into full panic mode. Legal is in emergency session. Liam looks like he might faint." I didn't respond. Our communications needed to remain strictly personal. but I allowed myself a small smile as I prepared for the inevitable pushback. It came within 4 hours. Teldrex's chief legal officer, Harrison Blackwood, called David Kim directly. I could hear Harrison's voice through the office wall, pitched just below, shouting, demanding to know why his company was being targeted and insisting on speaking to whoever had initiated this fishing expedition. David's responses were measured, professional, and utterly unmovable. When he finally called me into his office, Harrison was on speakerphone, mid-tirade. Completely unacceptable. We've been in full compliance with all federal regulations. This kind of harassment. Mr. Blackwood, David interrupted smoothly, I'd like you to meet Charlotte Rains, the auditor assigned to your preliminary inquiry. She'll be handling the document requests. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear Harrison recalculating his approach. Ms. Rains, his voice had shifted from anger to Arctic politeness. I should have guessed. This is personal, isn't it? Mr. Blackwood, I can assure you this inquiry is based entirely on risk indicators identified through standard ORO assessment procedures. Your company's recent structural changes and payment patterns triggered our review criteria. How convenient that you happen to be the one reviewing us. Actually, it's quite logical, I replied calmly. My familiarity with financial compliance in your industry makes me ideally suited to conduct an efficient review. Would you prefer an auditor who needs 6 months just to understand your business model? David covered what might have been a laugh with a cough. We'll need time to gather these documents, Harrison said finally. Some of what you're asking for is extensive. You have 30 days for the initial response. The request is quite standard. I'm sure your new director of compliance can help coordinate the effort. I'm sure he can, Harrison muttered. We'll be in touch. After he hung up, David leaned back in his chair. Well, that was interesting. I take it you have history with their legal team. Harrison tried to get me fired twice for refusing to sign off on questionable transactions. Both times, I had the documentation to prove I was right. And now he's about to learn why keeping good documentation matters, David smiled. Keep me posted on their response. Something tells me this is going to be educational for everyone involved. The education began 2 weeks later when Teldrex submitted their first batch of documents, or rather, what they claimed were documents. The files were a masterclass in malicious compliance, technically responsive to our requests, but practically useless. Financial records were provided as scanned PDFs, clearly photocopied multiple times until the numbers were barely legible. Board meeting minutes were redacted so heavily they looked like classified CIA documents. Vendor payment records were split across dozens of separate files with no clear organization system. They're trying to bury us in garbage, I told David, spreading out printed examples across his desk. It would take months to properly analyze this mess. Which is exactly what they're hoping for. He picked up one of the illegible financial statements. What do you want to do? Reject it all as non-responsive. Demand properly formatted digital files with searchable text, and add a notation to our file about apparent obstruction tactics. Done? What else? I smiled. I want to schedule some informal interviews, starting with their accounting department, in person. They'll lawyer up. Let them... Lawyers in the room make people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. The interview schedule was met with predictable resistance. Harrison Blackwood sent a 3-page letter outlining why in-person interviews were unnecessary, burdensome, and potentially disruptive to business operations. I responded with a single paragraph citing federal statute and confirming the interview dates. The first round of interviews took place in Teldrex's conference room, the same one where I'd been terminated. I found a poetic symmetry in sitting at the same polished table, this time with federal authority behind me. My interview strategy was simple. Start with low-level employees who had no reason to lie. Build a picture of current practices, then work up to management. Each interview was recorded, transcribed, and analyzed for inconsistencies. The pattern that emerged was damning. Nobody really knows what the documentation requirements are anymore, one accounting clerk told me nervously. Mr. Whitaker Liam, said we were over-documenting. Now we just process whatever comes through. And who approves these transactions? Well, it used to go through multiple reviews. Now, she glanced at the door where a company lawyer sat taking notes. Now it's more streamlined. Streamlined how? Direct approval from the C-suite. Faster that way. I made a note. Direct C-suite approval for routine transactions was a classic red flag. It bypassed normal controls and created opportunities for manipulation. The interviews continued for 3 days. Each session revealed more cracks in Teldrex's compliance facade. The new system Liam had implemented wasn't just inadequate, it was actively designed to obscure financial movements. We used to have this really detailed vendor verification process, another employee explained. But Liam said it was slowing down business. Now we just add vendors to the system as needed. Who requests these additions? Usually comes from the top. Mr. Whitaker, the CEO, has a list of preferred partners. And these partners are vetted how? The employee shifted uncomfortably. I assume someone vets them, just not us anymore. By the time I sat down with Liam Whitaker himself, I had enough testimonial evidence to justify a full audit, but I wanted to see how deep the incompetence or complicity went. Liam arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by 2 lawyers. He looked younger than his 24 years, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his fidgeting frame. "Ms. Raines," he said, attempting a confident smile. "Weird to be on this side of things, huh?" "Mr. Whitaker, I need you to walk me through your current compliance procedures." "Oh, sure. Well, I've really modernized things, cut out a lot of the redundancy. You know, all those reports you used to generate totally unnecessary. We're much more efficient now." "Efficient," I repeated. "Can you explain your vendor approval process?" "Yeah, it's great. Used to take weeks to approve a new vendor. Now we can do it in hours." "And the verification process?" "That's the beauty of it. We trust our partners. If the CEO vouches for them, why waste time with all that paperwork?" I maintained my professional expression while internally cataloging the federal violations he was cheerfully admitting to. "What about transaction monitoring? How do you flag suspicious payments?" "Suspicious," he laughed. "We're not a bank. We're just paying for services. As long as the invoice matches the payment, we're good." "And if the invoice is fraudulent?" His confidence finally wavered. "Well, I mean, why would it be? These are established business relationships." One of his lawyers leaned forward. "I think what Mr. Whitaker means is that Teldrex maintains strong vendor relationships based on trust and historical performance." "I see." I made another note. "Mr. Whitaker, are you familiar with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act?" "The what?" Both lawyers winced. "What about anti-money laundering regulations?" "Look, I have an MBA. I understand business. All these regulations are they're designed for criminal enterprises. We're a legitimate company. Legitimate companies are subject to the same regulations. Mr. Whitaker, that's why they're called regulations, not suggestions." He flushed. "Uncle Richard says, Mr. Whitaker, the CEO, believes in cutting through red tape to do business efficiently." "Efficiently?" I repeated again. "Tell me about the Meridian Group." The change in the room was electric. Liam's face went pale. The lawyers stiffened. Someone's phone buzzed insistently but went unanswered. "I don't what about them?" "They're one of your preferred vendors. $3 million in payments over the last 6 months. What services do they provide?" "Consulting." The word came out strangled. "What kind of consulting?" "Strategic, business strategy." "And their deliverables?" "Reports, strategy reports." "May I see these reports?" The senior lawyer intervened. "Those would contain proprietary business strategies. We'd need to review them for confidential information before—" "Of course," I said smoothly. "Please provide them within 14 days, with any necessary redactions for truly proprietary information. Though I should note that financial compliance documentation is rarely considered proprietary." The interview concluded with Liam looking sick and his lawyers looking grimmer. As they filed out, the senior lawyer lingered. "Ms. Raines, I hope you understand that Mr. Whitaker is new to this role. Any procedural oversights are simply a matter of inexperience, not malicious intent. Intent is certainly a factor we consider. I agreed. Though ignorance of federal law is rarely a complete defense, I assume you'll be recommending immediate compliance training for Mr. Whitaker. Among other things, he paused. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm doing my job. Counselor, the fact that it involves educating those who thought compliance was optional is merely coincidental. He left without another word. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Charlotte? Richard Whitaker's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. I think it's time we talked. Mr. Whitaker, any communications about the audit should go through official channels. This isn't about the audit. This is about the future, yours specifically. Is that a threat? It's an opportunity. Teldrex values talent. We made a mistake letting you go. What would it take to correct that mistake? Are you offering me a job during an active federal investigation? I'm offering you a chance to come home. Executive Vice President of Compliance. Double your current salary. Full autonomy to build the department however you see fit. That's a generous offer. You haven't heard the best part. Signing bonus of $2 million, vested immediately. I let the silence stretch out, knowing he would fill it. All we ask is that you help us navigate this current misunderstanding. Show us where we need to improve. Guide us toward compliance, from the inside, where you can really make a difference. Mr. Whitaker, are you attempting to bribe a federal official? I'm attempting to recruit a talented professional, nothing more. Then I'll respond as a professional. No thank you. Good evening. Charlotte, wait. I hung up and immediately documented the conversation in detail, then forwarded my notes to David Kim. Attempted bribery of a federal official was a serious crime, though proving intent would be difficult without a recording. Still, it showed desperation, and desperate people make revealing mistakes. The next morning, David called me into his office. They tried to buy you off. $2 million. They must be more exposed than we thought. Agreed. I'm upgrading this to a full audit. Bring in whoever you need. And Charlotte, watch your back. Companies don't throw around that kind of money unless they have a lot more to lose. I thought about the Meridian Group payments Grace had documented, about shell companies in Delaware strip malls, about board members who signed documents they never read. They do have a lot to lose, I said quietly. They just don't know how much yet. The full audit notification arrived at Teldrex Global on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail to ensure legal receipt. This time, I didn't need Grace's text to know the impact the panic was visible from the street. I'd positioned myself at a coffee shop across from their building, ostensibly working on my laptop while actually observing the reaction. Within minutes of delivery, I watched several executives hurry out to their cars, cell phones pressed to their ears. 2 town cars arrived to whisk board members away for what I assumed were emergency meetings. Someone on the 4th floor appeared to be shredding documents until a colleague yanked them away from the window. My phone buzzed. Grace again. Full meltdown. Emergency all-hands meeting in 20 minutes. Liam just threw up in a potted plant. This time I did respond. Take care of yourself. Document everything. This is about to get serious. The full audit meant expanded authority and resources. I brought in 2 additional auditors. Sarah Martinez, a forensic accounting specialist who could find fraud in a church bake sale, and James Wright, a former IRS criminal investigator who knew every trick in the corporate playbook. Teldrex Global, Sarah said, reviewing the preliminary files in our war room. Aren't they the ones who just announced record profits? Same ones, I confirmed. Apparently, streamlining compliance is very profitable, until it isn't. James pulled up their SEC filings on his laptop. Their stock is up 12% this year. Investors love the reduced operational costs. He looked at me over his reading glasses. I'm guessing those costs are about to go back up. Among other things, we spent 2 days preparing our assault. Every document request was crafted to close loopholes from their previous evasions. Every interview was strategically scheduled to prevent coordination of stories. Every financial record demand included specific format requirements that would make obfuscation impossible. "They're going to fight this," Sarah warned. "Companies with this much to lose always do." "Let them," I said. "Every obstruction goes in the file. Every delay gets documented. Either they cooperate and we find what we find, or they resist and add obstruction charges to the list." The formal audit began the following Monday. We arrived at Teldrex's headquarters with boxes of empty folders, digital forensics equipment, and the kind of quiet determination that made corporate lawyers nervous. Harrison Blackwood met us in the lobby with a phalanx of attorneys. "Ms. Rains, I trust we can handle this professionally." "Always." "Mr. Blackwood, we'll need a dedicated workspace with network access, a list of all personnel with financial authorization, and immediate access to your servers. Our IT department will need to review any access for security purposes." "Your IT department can observe," James interrupted, "but any delay in providing access will be noted as potential obstruction. I assume you've advised your client about the penalties for destroying evidence during a federal investigation." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Of course. We'll have you set up within the hour." The workspace they provided was in the basement, fluorescent lit and deliberately uncomfortable. They'd removed everything except basic furniture and a printer that looked older than Liam Whitaker. "Petty," Sarah observed, testing the unstable desk, "but predictable." "Actually, this is perfect," I said. "They want us out of sight fine. Less chance of them monitoring what we're finding." We set up our equipment and got to work. The first priority was imaging their financial servers, creating exact copies we could analyze without risk of data being altered after the fact. James handled the technical side, while Sarah and I began processing the physical documents they'd grudgingly provided. "Charlotte," Sarah called after an hour, "look at this." She'd found a pattern in the vendor payments I'd missed, not just the amounts, but the timing. Every suspicious payment occurred exactly 3 days before the end of a reporting period, just late enough to avoid scrutiny in quarterly reviews, but early enough to clear the banks. "That's not coincidence," I said. "That's system. Someone knew exactly how our reporting cycles worked. Someone like a former director of compliance." I shook my head. "I flagged this pattern last year. My recommendations to close this loophole were rejected by the board. The same board that's now scrambling to have emergency meetings." "The very same." By the end of the first week, we'd accumulated enough evidence to justify criminal referrals. The Meridian Group wasn't just a shell company, it was one of 17, all incorporated in Delaware, all receiving payments for vague consulting services, all leading back to the same post office box. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. "Ms. Rains," a young analyst named Kevin approached our basement workspace nervously. "Could I speak with you privately?" I followed him to the stairwell, where he handed me a flash drive with shaking hands. "I've been keeping records," he said quietly. "Ever since you left. You always said to document everything. So I did. Emails, memos, recorded conversations." "Kevin, I can't." "You don't understand. They're planning to blame everything on Liam. Make him the fall guy. But he was following direct orders. I have the emails to prove it." I held the drive carefully. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you were the only executive who ever cared about doing things right. And because," he swallowed hard, "because they're already fabricating evidence against him. I heard Harrison discussing it. They're going to claim he acted alone, exceeded his authority. He's 24 and stupid. But he doesn't deserve prison for following his uncle's orders." "Kevin, I need you to understand something. If I use this information, you could face retaliation." "I know. I've already got another job lined up. I start next month." He managed a weak smile. "You weren't the only one who saw the writing on the wall when you left." After Kevin departed, I stood in the stairwell for a long moment, weighing the drive in my hand. This wasn't just evidence, it was proof of conspiracy at the highest levels. The kind of proof that transformed a financial compliance audit into a criminal investigation. I returned to our workspace and plugged in the drive, following proper chain of custody procedures. What I found exceeded even my expectations. Email chains between Richard Whittaker and Harrison Blackwood explicitly discussing how to structure payments to avoid federal oversight. Board members acknowledging the illegality of certain transactions, but approving them anyway, most damning. A message from Miranda Chen suggesting they could fire me if I continued to obstruct business efficiency. Jesus, Sarah breathed, reading over my shoulder. This is RICO-level conspiracy. We need to brief David immediately, I said, and contact the DOJ. This just became bigger than a compliance audit. As we packed up for the day, I noticed unusual activity in the executive parking garage. Several senior leaders were leaving with bankers' boxes, the universal sign of rapid departure. My phone buzzed. Grace, mass exodus starting. 3 VPs submitted resignations today. Rumors saying FBI involvement imminent. I didn't respond, but I did smile. They'd said I was replaceable. They'd been wrong. I was irreplaceable not as their director of compliance, but as the person who knew where all the bodies were buried and had the authority to exhume them. That night, David called me at home. Charlotte, I just got off a conference call with DOJ. They're taking over the criminal aspects, but they want you to continue the financial audit. You've built the foundation, they need you to finish it. Understood. How long do I have? As long as it takes. But Charlotte, good work. This is exactly why we recruited you. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window, looking out at the D.C. skyline. Somewhere in that maze of lights, Teldrex executives were probably huddled with their lawyers, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. They couldn't. I'd learned their system, their patterns, their weaknesses, every shortcut they'd taken, every regulation they'd ignored, every warning they'd dismissed. It all led to this moment. The wine tasted like vindication. The criminal investigation moved with the grinding inevitability of federal justice. While the DOJ built their case, our audit team continued the methodical dissection of Teldrex's financial corpse. Every day brought new revelations, each more damaging than the last. Charlotte, you need to see this. James called from his workstation one morning. He'd been analyzing the digital forensics from Teldrex's servers, and his expression suggested he'd found something significant. On his screen was an email thread I'd never seen before, dated 6 months before my termination. The participants included Richard Whittaker, Harrison Blackwood, and 3 board members. The subject line was innocuous Compliance Department restructuring. But the content was anything but innocuous. We need to address the Charlotte situation. Richard had written, her constant interference is costing us millions in delayed transactions and lost opportunities. Harrison, what are our options? Harrison's response was clinical. Termination would require cause. She's too careful for that. But if we eliminate her position in a broader restructuring, bring in someone more aligned with our vision. My nephew just finished his MBA, Richard replied. Smart kid, understands business. More importantly, understands family. The thread continued for weeks, meticulously planning my removal and Liam's installation. They'd even discussed the optimal timing after I'd completed the yearly compliance review, but before I could implement new controls. They planned everything, I said quietly. My termination was just the first step in dismantling the entire compliance infrastructure. It gets worse, James said, pulling up another file. Look at the transaction history. 2 days after you were terminated, they started moving money. $17 million in the first month alone. All to these shell companies. Sarah joined us, carrying a stack of printed bank records. I've traced the shell companies. They all route back to personal accounts. Richard Whittaker bought a yacht. Harrison Blackwood purchased property in the Caymans. Even Miranda Chen got a cut. She bought a condo in Manhattan. Personal enrichment through corporate fraud, I summarized. They weren't just avoiding regulations, they were stealing. And they needed you gone to do it, James added. Your compliance controls were the only thing standing between them and millions in embezzled funds. I thought about that morning 6 months ago. Sitting across from Miranda as she called me replaceable, the careful way she'd avoided my eyes, the the relief in her voice when I'd seemed to accept the termination quietly. They'd thought they were so clever. "How much evidence do we have?" I asked. "Enough to bury them," Sarah said simply. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, probably RICO violations, and that's just what we've found so far." I stood, stretching muscles cramped from hours of hunching over documents. "Let's organize everything for DOJ, full chain of custody, every document cataloged. I want this package so complete that even a first-year prosecutor could get convictions." We worked through lunch, systematically building the case that would destroy the people who'd destroyed my career. There was a cold satisfaction in the work, like solving a complex puzzle where every piece revealed another crime. Around 3 o'clock, our basement workspace door opened. Harrison Blackwood entered, alone this time, looking haggard. His usual pristine appearance was marred by wrinkled clothes and shadowed eyes. "Ms. Raines, could we speak privately?" I glanced at Sarah and James. "Record everything," I told them quietly, then followed Harrison to the hallway. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "I need you to understand something. This wasn't supposed to happen. When we brought Liam in, it was just meant to streamline things, make the company more profitable. By eliminating compliance controls and stealing $17 million, he flinched. You know about that. We know about all of it. Harrison, the shell companies, the personal accounts, the conspiracy to remove me. Did you really think you could hide embezzlement of this scale?" "It wasn't embezzlement," he protested weakly. "It was performance bonuses, consulting fees, creative compensation. Call it whatever helps you sleep. The DOJ will call it wire fraud." He slumped against the wall. "Richard promised it was all legal. Said you were just overly cautious. That other companies did this all the time. I should have known better." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. You're the chief legal officer. Your entire job is knowing better." "What's going to happen to us?" I considered the question. Best case, massive fines, disgorgement of stolen funds, permanent bars from serving as corporate officers, worst case, federal prison. The DOJ will make that determination. "Charlotte, please, we worked together for years. Doesn't that count for something?" "It did," I said quietly, "until you decided I was replaceable." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I argued against firing you, but Richard was convinced you'd never go along with the new structure." He was right. "Yeah." Harrison opened his eyes, looking older than his 58 years. "Can I ask you something? When did you decide to come after us?" "I didn't come after you," I said honestly. "I took a job with ORO because I believe in financial compliance. Teldrex appeared on my radar because you dismantled your compliance department and started moving suspicious amounts of money. You came after yourselves. But you must have known we'd end up on your list." "I suspected, but Harrison, if you'd actually maintained compliance, if Liam had been competent, if you hadn't tried to bribe me, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You created this situation with every choice you made after I left." He was quiet for a long moment. "My lawyer says I should negotiate a plea deal, cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. That's between you and the DOJ. Would you recommend leniency if they asked?" I thought about the employees who'd been laid off to fund executive bonuses, the shareholders who'd been defrauded, the regulations designed to prevent exactly this kind of corruption, treated as inconveniences to be circumvented. "I'd recommend justice," I said finally. "Whatever that looks like." Harrison nodded slowly, then walked away without another word. He looked like a man walking to his execution. Back in our workspace, Sarah and James were boxing up evidence for transport to DOJ. "Productive conversation?" Sarah asked. He wanted to know if it was personal. Was it? I considered the question. It became personal when they made it personal, but the crimes, those were always going to surface. If not through me, then through someone else. That's the thing about financial fraud, it always leaves a trail. "Speaking of trails," James said, "I found one more thing you should see." He pulled up a bank record showing a wire transfer dated the day after my termination. $50,000 from a Teldrex account to a private investigator in Virginia. "They had you investigated?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "They wanted dirt," I realized. Something to discredit me if I ever spoke up about what I knew. "Did they find anything?" I laughed, surprising myself. What would they find? 7 years of 60-hour weeks, a boring personal life because I was too busy keeping them compliant. The most exciting thing in my background is a speeding ticket from college. "So they paid $50,000 to discover you're clean," James said. "That must have been frustrating." "Everything about me frustrated them," I said. "That's why they had to get rid of me." We finished packing the evidence as the sun set over Daika, casting long shadows through the basement windows. Tomorrow, the DOJ would begin presenting our findings to a grand jury. Indictments would follow, arrests, most likely. The complete dismantling of everything Richard Whittaker and his conspirators had built on a foundation of fraud. As we carried the boxes to our cars, I noticed lights still burning in the executive offices. Were they strategizing, destroying evidence, making peace with their choices? It didn't matter. We had everything we needed. "Beer," Sarah suggested as we loaded the last box. "I think we've earned it." "Rain check," I said. "I have one more stop to make." I drove to a small bar in Georgetown, a place that catered to government workers and had probably seen more deals made and broken than the Capitol itself. Grace was waiting in a corner booth, nursing a gin and tonic. "You look tired," she said as I slid in across from her. "Long few weeks. You look good. Though, new job agreeing with you." "Nonprofit work is different," she admitted. "The pay's lower, but I sleep better." "That's worth something." More than I realized. She signaled the waitress for another round. "So, tomorrow's the day. DOJ presents to the grand jury. Yes. How did you—" "Charlotte, half of Teldrex has already fled. The other half is consulting criminal lawyers. Everyone knows what's coming." "Any regrets about leaving?" "Only that I didn't leave sooner." She paused. "Actually, that's not true. I regret not speaking up more when you were there. Maybe if more of us had backed you up." "They would have fired all of us," I finished. "Don't carry that guilt. Grace, you did speak up when it mattered. That flash drive you gave me started this whole investigation." "Really? Really? Without your documentation of the Meridian Group payments, we might never have found the pattern. You're as responsible for this as anyone." She smiled sadly. "I just wanted to do the right thing. That's all any of us can do." We drank in comfortable silence for a while, watching the bar fill with the usual after-work crowd, young professionals celebrating small victories, older ones drowning larger defeats, the eternal cycle of ambition and disappointment that powered the city. "What's next for you?" Grace asked eventually, after Teldrex falls. "Back to regular audits, other companies, other frauds. There's never a shortage." "Doesn't it get depressing, always looking for the worst in people?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But sometimes you find the best, too. Employees like Kevin who risk their careers to expose wrongdoing. Colleagues like you who preserve evidence. Even Harrison, in the end, seemed to understand the weight of his choices." Harrison Blackwood grew a conscience. More like he realized the cost of not having one. Grace raised her glass. "To consequences, then—" "To consequences," I agreed, touching my glass to hers. Later, driving home through the D.C. traffic, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been discarded like obsolete equipment, told I was replaceable by people who saw compliance as an impediment to profit. Now those same people were facing federal indictments, their careers destroyed, their freedom in jeopardy, not through revenge, but through the simple application of the laws they'd thought themselves above. They'd been right about one thing: I had been replaceable. They'd replaced me with someone who wouldn't challenge them, wouldn't question their schemes, wouldn't stand between them and their crimes. But they'd been wrong about something more fundamental. They'd thought that without me, they were free to operate without constraints. They'd forgotten that compliance isn't about one person. It's about systems, laws, and eventually, inevitably, consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from David Kim. "Excellent work. Charlotte, DOJ is impressed. You should be proud." I was proud, not of bringing down my former employer, but of upholding the principles they'd abandoned, of proving that financial regulations weren't suggestions but requirements, of demonstrating that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. They'd said I was replaceable. They'd learned, too late, that integrity isn't. The indictments came down on a Tuesday morning like Judgment Day. I wasn't in the courtroom, my part was done. The evidence delivered, but I watched the news coverage from my office as federal agents arrested 17 Teldrex executives and board members. The footage was dramatic. Richard Whitaker led away in handcuffs from his mansion. Harrison Blackwood surrendering at his lawyer's office. Miranda Chen caught at JFK trying to board a flight to Hong Kong. "Charlotte," David Kim said from my doorway, "there's someone here to see you." I looked up from the newsfeed to find Liam Whitaker standing beside David, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past month. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame, and his hands shook slightly as he clutched a manila envelope. "5 minutes," David said quietly, then left us alone. Liam stood awkwardly in the middle of my small office, seemingly unsure whether to sit or flee. "Ms. Raines, I thank you for seeing me." "What can I do for you, Mr. Whitaker?" "Liam, please, I'm not anything anymore." He gestured vaguely at the chair. "May I?" I nodded. He sat on the edge of the seat, placing the envelope on my desk with trembling fingers. "I wanted to give you this. It's a letter, an apology, and a full confession of everything I did, everything I was told to do. Liam, you should be giving this to your lawyer or the DOJ. I already have. This copy is for you." He met my eyes for the first time. "I need you to understand something. I know I was incompetent. I know I was in over my head, but I wasn't. I didn't know about the stealing, the fraud. I thought I was just making things more efficient by eliminating all compliance controls." Uncle Richard said. He stopped, swallowed. No more excuses. I chose to listen. I chose to ignore the warning signs. I chose to dismiss your work as unnecessary bureaucracy because it was easier than learning why it mattered. He was crying now, tears sliding down his young face. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. Another part remembered the cavalier way he talked about streamlining away protections that existed for good reasons. "What do you want from me? Liam?" "Nothing. I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here because I needed to face you, to acknowledge what I helped destroy." He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "My lawyer says I'm looking at 3 to 5 years, minimum, more if they can prove I knew about the embezzlement. Did you know?" "Not specifically, but I should have. All those payments to companies I'd never heard of. All those approvals Uncle Richard pushed through without documentation. I should have known." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." He nodded miserably. "I've been reading your old reports. The ones I thought were so unnecessarily detailed. They're brilliant. Every risk identified. Every solution proposed. If they'd just listened to you. But they didn't, and neither did you." "No. I was so proud to be Director of Compliance at 24. Youngest in the company's history. I thought it meant I was special." He laughed bitterly. "It meant I was useful, malleable, too stupid to ask questions." I studied him for a long moment. Despite everything, I found myself feeling a fraction of pity. He'd been used, certainly, but he'd allowed himself to be used. "Liam, can I give you some advice?" He looked up hopefully. "Please. Take responsibility, fully. Don't minimize. Don't make excuses. Don't blame others even when they deserve it. Accept the consequences of your choices. Learn from this. And when you get out, because you will get out, use that knowledge to do better." "Do you think," he hesitated, "do you think anyone will ever hire me again in compliance?" "Honestly, probably not. But there are other ways to contribute. Teaching, consulting, writing about corporate governance failures. Turn your mistakes into lessons for others. He stood, looking marginally less destroyed. Thank you for seeing me, for your advice, for being the professional I should have tried to be. After he left, I opened the envelope. His confession was thorough, detailing every corner he'd cut, every control he'd eliminated, every warning he'd ignored. At the bottom, he'd written by hand, Ms. Rains. I'm sorry I called your work unnecessarily detailed. It was necessarily detailed. I just wasn't sophisticated enough to understand the necessity. I hope someday to be half the compliance officer you were. Liam. I filed the letter and returned to the news coverage. The financial press was having a field day. Teldrex scandal. How a compliance director's firing led to federal indictments, read one headline. Another proclaimed, the replaceable woman who brought down a corporate empire. My phone had been ringing all morning, reporters wanting statements, competitors offering jobs, even a literary agent suggesting I write a book. I ignored them all. The work spoke for itself. Knock, knock. Sarah Martinez peered around my door. Thought you might want to see this. She handed me a printout from the DOJ's press release. At the bottom, there was a note. This investigation was made possible by the thorough and professional audit conducted by Oro Special Investigator Charlotte Rains and her team. Nice recognition, I said. Nice, Charlotte. You just took down a major corporation's entire leadership. That's legendary. I did my job. We all did. Don't minimize this, Sarah insisted. What you accomplished building a case this airtight while maintaining complete professional integrity, that's rare. Most people would have let it get personal. It was personal, I admitted. But I didn't let that drive the investigation. The evidence drove it. And that's why you're legendary, she grinned. Come on, the team's going to Murphy's to celebrate. You're buying the first round. Why am I buying? Because you're the one who's definitely getting promoted after this. I laughed. Fine, 1 round, but then I have reports to write. Reports on the case that just ended. Reports on the next case. There's always a next case. As we left the building, my phone buzzed with one final message. Grace. Watching the news. So proud of you. Dinner next week to celebrate. I replied, absolutely. Your choice of restaurant. Someplace expensive. I have a feeling I'm about to get a raise. The bar was crowded with the usual government worker crowd, but our team had commandeered a corner table. James Wright raised his beer as we approached. To Charlotte Rains, he announced, who proved that compliance isn't about making friends, it's about making sure everyone follows the damn rules. To the damn rules, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. I drank to that. To the rules that protected investors from fraud, employees from exploitation, and the financial system from those